Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Michael Hirsch again as the host of the Stay Connected with the Worcester Senior Center, giving you a July show. We're more than halfway done with the year. Wow. I was just saying to our wonderful engineers here that I don't know where the time has gone, but July is the second month of summer. The days are starting to get shorter, believe it or not, but this is the fun time where the sun is out most of the time. We're not getting quite as much showers, maybe a thunder shower here and there, but we should be in for some good weather. If you want to go to the beach or you want to go to one of our pools in Worcester or lakes, just have to be really careful, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. July is named after Julius Caesar, and he was the first person to put together, at least in modern antiquity, a calendar, the Julian calendar, so he gets a month. And it's a very popular month for vacations. All of the hubbub of weddings and graduations has kind of died down, and this is the time kids are out of school. And at least in this hemisphere, it's very nice weather generally. This stone for the month is the ruby, which traditionally has been one that represents deep devotion and love. And the flower for the month of July is the blue delphinium, which is an absolutely beautiful flower. I don't know if any of you out there are gardeners. I suspect some of you are. My wife is a master gardener, and we have some of these delphinium in our garden. And it's the blue color is just astounding. It's not just plain old blue. It's kind of more like a royal blue, beautiful flower. July is an important month for events and things of that sort. Of course, we have the 4th of July here in the United States. This is a very important one because it's approaching next year's 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. This is the 249th. I think they're all pretty important right now, and it would be a worthwhile effort if you haven't done it in a while to actually read the Declaration of Independence, because as I'll come back to later in this discussion, the risk that the Sons of Liberty and the folks that wanted to cast off the yoke of being a colony under Mad King George III was that if they got caught or if they got defeated, they were not going to necessarily be treated as prisoners of war. They were going to be treated as traitors. And the punishment for treason back then was hanging or firing squad. So this was a huge consequential step that these founding fathers took in having Thomas Jefferson create that document, that Declaration of Independence. And there's a lot of controversy now as to whether we're living up to the courage that those men had in writing that. And the whole No Kings movement that happened towards the end of June, this is what that's about. Because the creation of the country, based not just on the Declaration of Independence, but on the Constitution that then came out in 1789, was that we had a system of checks and balances, 3 equal houses of government, that no one branch superseded the other. And that's under some question right now. But I'll get back to that. So what else is going on in the very nice month of July? Well, it's very important to recognize 4th of July. I'd also like to recognize July 8th. What is July 8th? July 8th actually is a holiday in the Ukraine celebrating their air forces. And those are the forces that have really kept Russia from rolling over the country. Yes, the ground troops in their trenches have been trying to hold the line, but without the intervention of the drones, and you're probably familiar with the big drone attack that happened last month, where 45% of Russia's air power was destroyed by infiltrating drones into the country gradually over a 6-month period and launching them 4 miles away from air bases, undetected. It's a brilliant stroke. And I guess I'm not being a poker face about this. I want Ukraine to maintain its sovereignty. I think the precedent of having a country like Russia be able to roll over a neighboring country without suffering consequences is horrible. And it's so reminiscent of what Hitler did in World War II when he rolled into Czechoslovakia and he rolled into Austria and he rolled into Poland unchecked. Nobody stopped him until he finally went too far and actually attacked Russia, who he'd made a non-aggression pact with. This act of President Putin from Russia, very reminiscent, and it's just a disgrace, in my humble opinion, these are opinions that are my own, that we haven't as stoutly supported Ukraine and even questioned who was the aggressor in this fight. Ukraine didn't invade Russia. Ukraine did nothing other than try to become a part of the European Union and try to become a part of NATO. And that apparently set Putin off, and he decided he was going to annex the Ukraine. And after 3 years, he's still trying. But we're here in the United States should be much more supportive of the notion that a country can't be rolled over like that. And I hope that between the European Union and NATO, that Ukraine gets the support it needs to hold the line. Don't let Putin win. Putin should not win in this fight. And we should be doing everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, so that's July 8th. I don't really have many other big dates in July. July 14th, if you're of French origin, is Bastille Day. Bastille Day celebrates the real beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. The common people stormed the prison called the Bastille, which no longer exists, but in those days it held many French revolutionaries who wanted to throw off the yoke of the Bourbon monarchy, and particularly Louis XVI. It was a much more chaotic and bloody revolution than ours in many ways, because they actually captured the king and queen, and the revolutionaries beheaded them using this awful guillotine that they developed just for the occasion. And then they were kind of taken over by a power-hungry despot named Napoleon Bonaparte. And it really took France almost 70 years to kind of recover from the revolution. We kind of got our act together very quickly after Cornwallis was defeated in Yorktown in 1781. But a lot of that was because we had some very lucky founding fathers. We were lucky to have these founding fathers like George Washington, who was offered a chance to become the king of the United States. But he said, no, I fought this war to end the monarchy here in the United States. So he instead accepted the presidency and started a tradition of the president having a lot of power, but he was not a king. He was not above the law. I will come back to that later. So Bastille Day is one of those days that you can look at it in July. I think the other thing I'd like to talk about in July is more of like a fave kind of thing of mine. It's National Hot Dog Month and it's National Ice Cream Month. Oh my goodness. Those are two of my absolute favorite things. They're not healthy. I'm not trying to tell you, stock up on these or eat them every day. But there's nothing like a good hot dog when you go to the ball game or when you're having a cookout. And certainly ice cream is just a treat that never stops giving. So that's what I can tell you about the month of July. If you want to go back 80 years, the month of July was just the last big battle of World War II was ending in Okinawa. It started on April 1st, 1945, and the generals said it would take about 2 weeks to sweep through Okinawa. Okinawa was an island so close to Japan, it was called a home island. It had many Japanese civilians on it that lived peacefully there. But the Japanese brought 100,000 troops there to defend it, and we needed to invade it because it was a great air base for our B-29s to continue their bombing of the Japanese mainland. That was what we were hoping would drub the Japanese into submission. So the toll of that battle was unbelievable. We lost 9,000 men, which was the costliest battle in the history of World War II. 5,000 of them were sailors, because this was when the Japanese really launched their kamikaze attacks on all of the ships that were supporting the land troops on Okinawa. And we lost hundreds of ships with resultant 5,000 sailors dying. So it was a bloody, bloody mess. And in addition to that, 100,000 civilians were killed and 95,000 Japanese soldiers were killed. The carnage was horrible, and it took a lot longer than 2 weeks to do what we needed to do to conquer that island. And that was a big part of convincing Truman, our president at the time, that the only way to drub Japan into submission was to use the atomic bomb. And that was a fateful decision. It's still very controversial, but I can tell you my father-in-law was a B-29 bombardier himself. He participated in 17 firebombing missions over Japan, including Tokyo. The biggest one was on March the 10th, 1945. And he was absolutely convinced that it was the right move, because he said the Japanese were just training little kids, teenagers, girls, mothers to kill 10 soldiers for every one of them that died. And it would have taken years for Operation X Day, which was the planned invasion of the home island, to really be complete. And I mean, the estimates of what we would have lost in terms of personnel, anywhere from 250,000 to even 750,000 soldiers. And we were tired. We'd been fighting for 4 years. We just didn't have the stamina to continue that kind of a slog. So the A-bomb shortened the war, for sure. But it ushered in a nuclear age, which now, if you've been following the news, we have a war going on in the Middle East that is all about trying to prevent a country from getting a nuclear bomb. And there are a lot of consequences to getting into the atomic age. If any of you have seen the movie Oppenheimer, which was a big hit 2 years ago in the summer, it's a very thoughtful piece about the man that helped to develop the A-bomb, and he lived the rest of his life worrying that he had made a mistake. Hindsight is 20/20, but I think having lived and known a World War II veteran and my father-in-law, the Army and the Army Air Corps was taxed to the max. They would have had a tough time continuing another 2 to 3 year slog trying to get the Japanese to surrender. Okay, so Okinawa is over. 80 years. Still have to pay homage to the brave guys that fought there. Not many of them left. When you see these celebrations, like we had the celebration for the 250th anniversary of the Army, most of these World War II vets are between 95 and 100. So God bless them and thank you for their service. And we hope that we can somehow stay out of these world conflagrations moving forward. But it gets harder and harder because people are emboldened by the fact that a lot of the strength that we had in NATO, in the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, SEATO, the solidarity is gone. So if you're a dictator, if you're power hungry like Mr. Putin, like Kim Jong-un, like Xi Jinping, these people don't have as much concern about the consequences if they stir up a war. They try to take over Taiwan. They try to invade South Korea. If they try to take over the Ukraine. I think there was a lot of hope that this administration in Washington would allow us to project strength so that perhaps these dictators would stand down. But I think that instead we have not projected that strength. We've been distracted. Where have we been distracted? And I will get to that, I promise, in a minute. First, my duty is to talk about public health, because that's really what I do. And we're approaching this season where mosquitoes are a big, big problem, and ticks are a big, big problem. And I will tell you that the tick diseases that we're talking about are not just Lyme's disease. We need to protect ourselves because there are 4 or 5 other diseases that they are causing, because there are different kinds of ticks that have made their way north from the south to the north as climate change has occurred, and these ticks carry these different diseases. The main one is called babesiosis, and it really can cause a lot of acute illness. Lyme's disease is more of maybe a flare-up and then chronic illness afterwards. but babesiosis can really put you in the hospital, especially if you have medical comorbidities, other medical problems like respiratory, cardiac, cancer, immune problems. So if you're out there enjoying the outdoors, enjoying picnics, enjoying walks in the woods with your dogs, without your dogs, please check yourselves for ticks when you come back in the home. Make sure that you are wearing, if you can, appropriate clothing that doesn't leave so much exposed skin. And understand it's not just ticks getting onto your ankles and your lower extremities. They're up in the bushes now, and they can jump onto your shoulder, onto your back. They love to go where they know you don't necessarily see them, but suddenly, like a day later, you'll feel like, ouch, I got something going on here. So if you have a partner, a friend, a child who would look on your back and take a look at your ankles and do some checking with you, that's very important. And before you expose yourself to that kind of outdoor activity, either make sure that your clothing is impregnated with Premethyn. You can get it pre-bought that way, or you can apply it yourself, or put DEET on you. DEET, not DDT, DEET, which is an excellent tick repellent. It's also great for getting rid of the mosquito risk. And many of the DEET solutions now that are out there, they last through even going into the water if you're at a lake or something like that. So you don't have to reapply it all the time. And they're safe for babies, they're safe for any age person, and they don't cause cancer. So remember, I go through this every year, the 5 Ds. Dress, meaning long sleeves if possible, long pants if possible. DEET is the second D. Then dawn and dusk is the time of day that the mosquitoes are most active. Try to avoid being out during those times. And then drain standing water in culverts, in old tires, in barrels, in rain barrels. Drain that. And we have a wonderful system here in Worcester. We participate in the Central Mass Regional Mosquito Control Program that is testing constantly for mosquitoes and to see whether or not they are carrying West Nile virus or Eastern equine encephalitis, triple E virus. And if they find a neighborhood where they have a positive hit, they will go out and warn the neighborhood and then spray. And during the spraying, you have to keep your windows closed, keep your pets and children inside for like an hour, and then it's safe to go outside. And this has been a very successful program. We haven't had a death or even a case of triple E in several years. And we've had a couple of West Nile virus cases over the last 5 years. It's hard to always know if a Worcester resident has gone on vacation into New Hampshire where he got the West Nile virus, but it gets coded by wherever the person lives, not by where they traveled. So I think we've been very lucky and have used a lot of foresight in the Department of Public Health to get this mosquito control program on board with us in Worcester, and thanks to city manager for allocating the dollars that it takes to support that mosquito control program. So the other infectious diseases that I talk about all the time, COVID. There is a new strain of COVID. It's come over via Asia to the West Coast. I am sure by the time this program airs, there'll be more cases moving east. I don't know if it'll have reached Massachusetts by then, but there's a lot of travel going on, and it might get here. It doesn't seem to be as deadly as certainly the first several waves of COVID, the first wave or the Delta wave or the initial Omicron wave, but it has one symptom that's very annoying and painful, and that is terrible sore throat. People describe it as razor blade throat, where every time you swallow, it feels like you're swallowing something sharp and irritating. So, what can you do? If you haven't gotten a booster and you're worried about going out to the West Coast, I would definitely think about getting a booster. The booster recommendations are kind of on hold now, and we'll talk about that now. Yes, our Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., as you know, does not believe in vaccinations. Despite what he said to the Senate confirmation hearings, he is doing everything he can to undermine confidence in vaccinations. He fired the panel that advised about vaccinations, 17 people who usually met at the end of June to decide what strains of the influenza virus we should be honing in on for the flu vaccine this coming fall, and also just in general talking about the outbreaks that we've had of measles and polio and other diseases that vaccines had practically wiped out. But now, because we had lost some of our percentage of vaccinations in states like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, it's been an outbreak that has resulted in the deaths of 3 children in case of measles. Polio less so. We haven't had any deaths, but this is something that we just didn't see before this year. So the vaccine hesitance and the vaccine distrust that R.F. Kennedy Jr. and people like him have sown have resulted in lower vaccination rates. And that's a tragedy because it's going to affect us for years to come. So the 17 people that were fired were replaced with 8. At least 5 of those 8 that RFK Jr. has picked are well-known and published vaccine doubters. They are big believers in what we call herd immunity. We have always touted at the Mass Department of Public Health and the Worcester Department of Public Health herd immunity too. We like herd immunity, but we like to achieve herd immunity through vaccination. The folks that are on the panel now that is going to be advising RFK about vaccine policy, they believe in herd immunity by having everyone get the disease and then see what happens. When people get measles, which is extremely contagious, about 1 out of 1,500 will die. And also 1 out of 500 will develop a severe brain infection that may cause permanent brain damage. When you're talking about a nation of 350 million people, that's not a small number. And the whole notion, it's preventable with a simple vaccine. And why are the vaccines being trashed like this? Because our HHS secretary believes that vaccination causes autism. That is a disproved misinformation fact. There wasn't a British scientist who published about this in the late 90s. He's been completely debunked. He falsified his information. his paper is trash. But RFK Jr. believed in it enough to make this his cause. And it's really a tragedy. And he's also obviously perjured himself under oath in front of the Senate because he said he wasn't going to mess with the vaccine schedule. So I'm just telling you that there will be a new COVID booster sometime in the fall. There will be new flu shots sometime in the fall. And I think you should still get them. And I don't think that you should take a chance. If you, in particular, are over 65 and have those comorbidities again, immune problems, cardiac problems, respiratory problems, obesity problems, diabetes problems, you definitely should get the vaccine. RFK Jr. doesn't want to require it for children or for pregnant women. There's no evidence that the vaccines hurt pregnant women during the pandemic. There were a couple of isolated problems with blood clots, but the one company that was really the most responsible for that was Johnson & Johnson, and they were taken off the market for pregnant women. Kids got the vaccination really without much problems. There was an outbreak. It was a small percentage of children that got cardiac muscle infections called myocarditis from getting the Moderna vaccination, the mRNA vaccination for COVID. But it was very, very few and far between, because millions got it and only, hundreds got the myocarditis. And it was something that could be survived. It wasn't deadly. So I sound like a broken record. It seems like every month I'm talking about this. I'm very upset about the HHS actions. You see today I'm wearing a firearm safety jacket that I got through the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma. All the while all this stuff is going on in the world, right? Wars in the Ukraine, wars in the Middle East, demonstrations in many cities about ICE and immigration, incarceration of people, snatching people off the streets, denying people their redress in the court of law. In the background, there have been at least a dozen mass shootings that have gone on all through this time. One of the things that our HHS secretary did in the last 6 months of his administration, he did away with the injury prevention section of the CDC, and in particular, the group that was studying firearm violence. So, firearm violence is the #1 killer of people up until the age of 34 in the United States. We're losing about 45,000 people every year to firearm violence. 55% of that is homicide, but 45% of it is suicide. It's very preventable with the right type of education, with the right type of psychosocial supports. All of the research that went into the statistics I just mentioned has been shut down now. So it's not just vaccinations that are being affected. And of course, we've done away with 2/3 of our weather forecasting abilities. We've done away with the folks that look at environmental protections. We have really left the country vulnerable to natural disasters, man-made disasters, violence, and here's where I'm going to come back to what I was starting to refer to with the No Kings movement. So let me tell you a little anecdote, and I know I've spoken about this before, but for you new listeners, many of you know that both of my parents grew up under Nazi rule. My mother in Vienna, Austria, my father in Berlin. They didn't talk a lot about their experiences until I was much older and they were much older. It took about 40 years for them to start talking to me about what it was like first to be in a country where systemically their rights were taken away. They weren't allowed to go to school anymore after 1933. They weren't allowed to have certain jobs. They weren't allowed to go to universities. They weren't allowed to do certain shopping in certain stores. They had curfews put on them. And finally, they ended up in concentration camp together in Holland. And then they came to the United States. And they told me they were so grateful that they had made it here and that they had a chance for a new life with the freedoms that we had. But the worst time for them, and all the times that they were here, was during the McCarthy era with the quote-unquote Red Scare, because it felt to them very much like what Hitler did in the 30s in Germany and Austria. He had to have a boogeyman, and he made the Jews the boogeyman, and everything was blamed on them. And the same thing happened with McCarthy. Senator McCarthy from Wisconsin blamed the Reds, said the communists were infiltrating the army, they were infiltrating universities, they were infiltrating every aspect of the government. And that Red Scare had that feeling of terror that they had when they were still living in Germany and Austria. Fear is a terrible thing. It can be all-encompassing. It takes away your sleep. It makes your appetite poor. It diminishes your joy of living, and you make bad decisions when you're afraid. We, as a country right now, are suffering from an epidemic of fear. Fear about having our friends and neighbors, and even ourselves, snatched off the street by masked federal agents and being put into detention, if you're lucky, in this country, or if not lucky, flown to Sudan or to Honduras or El Salvador without the benefit of any recourse in the courts. You're being denied your due process. And I think that, to me, this is the biggest public health issue that we're facing right now. Yes, I told you, gun violence is part of that, because when people are afraid, they go out and they buy guns and they load up and they're ready to defend themselves, defend the homestead. And kids are packing pieces going out. When they go out Saturday night, they're carrying weapons. It all is interrelated. And, you know, FDR said in one of his most famous speeches early on in his 4-term regime that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. I agree with that. I think fear is one of the things that we should try and tamp down, because it makes people act crazy, irrationally. People will have road rage. People will have uncivil behavior at city council meetings. People will have problems just in the supermarket with strangers. It's not a healthy environment. Probably, climate change is awful, and I think it's going to have huge health effects. But if we have another 2 or 3 years of this kind of environment where everybody is feeling afraid, I think that it's going to be, in the short term, much more harmful. So, you may be familiar with the artist named Norman Rockwell. He paints all these beautiful depictions of American life, mostly from the 20s to the 60s. He was active. He's passed away now. There's a beautiful museum out in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, if you ever get a chance to go out there, where you can see the range of his paintings. But one of his most famous paintings was the Four Freedoms. They were outlined again by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it's a 4-panel portrait of what makes America great. So we have freedom to worship, we have freedom from hunger, we have freedom of speech, and we have freedom from fear. This is a huge concept that we have to get back to. People should be free of fear. And, I know that there are anywhere between 15 and 20 million undocumented aliens in this country. But they are our friends and neighbors to the largest degree. Yes, are there some undesirable people that have made it over the border in the last 10 years? These MS-13 gangs and people like that? Yes, but for every one of those gang members, there's hundreds of people that work in our service industries, in our farms, in our big box stores, for moving companies, all of the jobs that need to be done but are not necessarily being done by Native American citizens. And I don't think that once those people are deported in the grand master plan of President Trump, that we are going to see other people stepping up to get those jobs. They're not necessarily well paying. Many of those undocumented aliens are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. And I feel very strongly that they are essential workers. During the pandemic, we rewarded essential workers by putting to the front of the line to get vaccinations, because we knew that they were the backbone of how the Worcester County worked. We didn't want to leave them out. We wanted to put them first so they could continue to help us get our food and get our shopping done and get essential services done. Many of those workers work in hospitals. They do a lot of the important things to clean up our trauma bay when there's blood everywhere. It's a very, very underappreciated segment of the population. And now it's not only underappreciated, they're being targeted. So I'm being very political here, and I'm not supposed to be. I'm supposed to be neutral and just tell you about public health. But I believe that this fear factor is going to affect your health more than almost anything that I've mentioned today about public health. And the only way to change the environment is to be out there and say, this is not us. We are not this country. We are not the country that incarcerates, that imprisons, that harasses, that scares the population. We are not out there to pick up volleyball captains in Millbury whose only crime was that their parents came 20 years ago and never got citizenship. And unfortunately, in the environment we have now, except for the courts, nobody is challenging any of the edicts coming out of the White House. So the legislative branch has gone to bed. They're hibernating. So let me end on a good note. The Massachusetts Department of Public Health is really now our leader of public health. And we are fortunate at the Worcester Department of Public Health. We're in a consortium now with Springfield and Boston to do their bidding. And their bidding is very, very much still focused on helping the most needy among us. That's really what helps all of the public health, is to raise up the folks that have the biggest challenges in public health. And undocumented immigrants are amongst those. They don't have the vaccinations when they come here. They don't understand the language. They don't have an easy path to getting employment. They don't have an easy path of getting their kids in school. And that makes them much more vulnerable to all different kind of things, everything from human trafficking to crime. So we're very lucky that we have a fantastic Mass Department of Public Health. Robbie Goldstein, who is our commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, is a true hero. And here in Worcester, we're again very, very lucky. We have Dr. Maddie Castile as our Commissioner of Health and Human Services, who has a lifelong career protecting the people that need the most protection, whether it's sex workers, the homeless, folks that are suffering from addiction, and underrepresented minorities. So I think that we're going to keep the city of Worcester and greater Worcester protected, despite what happens in Washington, despite what's happening in Atlanta at the CDC. If for some reason we can't continue doing that again, we're going to fight tooth and nail to be able to maintain what we think is the correct health priorities, not the ones that are made up by someone whose brain was eaten by a worm. These are not edicts coming down from Washington that we can abide by. So forgive me for being very political, but in the memory of my parents, I don't want to have my 3 grandchildren or any of you or your grandchildren or children to live in the kind of fear that they had to abide by. And I fervently pray that in one of these upcoming shows that I do, it'll be more upbeat, and also that I can tell you some things have been reversed back to the way they made sense just a short 6 months ago. So with that, I wish you a wonderful July. I hope that you stay safe. Remember, the kids are out of school, so when you're driving, look out for them. They don't always cross the street in the greatest ways. And please come back for another month's session in August, when we return to staying connected with the Worcester Senior Center. So this is Mike Hirsch signing off.